Hello everyone, welcome to today's edition of KOTESOL Conversations. This topic today is designing materials for young learners. And when I chose this topic, there were two people I immediately thought about. One was Annie Altamirano and also Rhett Burton. Two people I know very well, especially through social media. They're always posting different things about designing materials for young learners. And Annie also doing lots of conference presentations, designing lots of materials, textbooks. Rhett, I'm more familiar with through KOTESOL and Facebook. I think Rhett has his own English academy. Is that right, Rhett?
Well, it's a homeschool, but most people would call it an academy, but it's a homeschool.
A homeschool, but you do design a lot of materials, or almost all your own materials. Is that right?
Almost use completely nothing but my own materials.
That's right. That's good. And Annie, I think also in the past you were the president of TESOL Spain. Is that right?
President of TESOL Spain for 4 years until 2018. Now I am the vice president and liaison officer.
Great. And when did you get involved in designing materials, at least professionally, Annie?
Well, I started about 20 years ago. I was living in Argentina at that time. I am originally from Argentina, and I was approached by Macmillan, the Argentine division of Macmillan, and they offered me a wonderful project at the time. It was to write a course, a 4-level course for public schools in Argentina, and I was like, what? I mean, are you sure? and I said, listen, I've never written a book in my life.
Yeah.
And I remember the manager, who I really knew very well, he said, but Annie, you design your own materials for your classroom. And I said, well, yes, but writing a book is different. And he said, no, it's not. And so that's how it all started. So I haven't stopped writing since then.
Yeah.
It was 20, yes, it was in the end of 1999.
And what's kept this burning desire to keep designing materials? Like you haven't moved to something else, you still have this passion. What is it about designing materials that really interests you?
Well, I think that it's got to do with Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison said that if there's a book that you want to read but hasn't been written, then you must write it. So it was like, okay, I was always thinking, yeah, I like this, but I don't like that from published materials, right? So I said, why not try to write my own thing? Of course, as an author, as a published author, if you're working with a publisher, you can never, ever do everything you want.
Yeah.
But at least you can do something of what you want.
And that's a good point. Yeah, a lot of teachers that I've worked with over the last 12 years always complaining about textbooks and worksheets they have to use from their employer, but why not get involved in the process? Why not jump in and say, hey, I'll start designing stuff that I like? Was it similar for you, Rhett? Was that how you got involved? Was it like, I want to make really nice materials better than what I'm seeing in my classes?
Oh, I was just going to say that, because it's so much work. Sometimes like when you're trying to write that book that's never been written before, it's like mind-boggling difficult because you're drawing in so much inspiration from so many places. You're drawing in all your experiences, all your knowledge, all your skill sets, and then you got to organize it in a way that makes sense. And it's like, when you're thinking about like doing it, it seems really easy. But once you start doing it, it's like, oh no, it's a lot more difficult. And then it takes like, I was listening to somebody talk the other day. It's like things like take 2 times longer than you think it was going to take to begin with.
So you get all these ideas for creating materials, right? How do you decide what materials to make? Like, how do you get to that process of actually putting pen to paper?
Well, you know, the first thing I actually did was I threw all my books on the table and I said, oh, these are the assets I have. And it was just a mess. And then, you know, so I started cleaning up and I started removing stuff from the table and said, I don't need this, don't want that. And actually I got rid of it. I said, well, this is going to be taking up space in my head. Don't need it, don't want it. Just be gone with it. And I actually recycled it. And well, I took it outside, so I just didn't have to worry about it anymore. And then I got really clear on what I wanted to do. And by getting clear, like it's not always easy to get clear on stuff, because you have to have conversations with people, and because the ideas have to come from you, but you have to talk to like somebody like mentors or, you know, coaches or other writers, and then they will sort of like guide you to to your destination. Like, you know, the direction, you know where you're going, but you're not exactly sure how you're going to get there. And by working with other people or talking with other people, they can sure bring that clarity to the development of whatever materials you're bringing.
Absolutely, absolutely. When, for example, when I of course, when I started my teaching career, I had the support of my fellow teachers. And I was a rookie at the time, so I had all these senior teachers helping me out with what I was doing. But then when I started writing, actually writing a book, I was also really lucky because I wasn't alone. I mean, I had a co-author. And I think that we made this fabulous team because she was a very experienced writer, but she had no classroom experience. And I was a very experienced classroom teacher, but I had no experience writing books. So the manager very wisely said, "You're the perfect tandem." And on top of that, we had a fabulous editor, Fiona Mackenzie. It was my co-author was Catherine Harper. I always mention them because they were so important in my professional life as a writer. So Catherine and I really made a wonderful team, and we've been working together for years in different projects with different publishers. And Fiona, I think that she was essential in my becoming a writer. She taught me so much. She was such powerful presence for both of us, because it was also for Catherine. And she was always such a powerful presence and a person, such a generous person, a very tactful editor. She was always there supporting us and telling us, and especially telling me, because it was like, okay, where do I begin? But then with their support, the first, I would say that the first book for me was a real challenge, because I was like, oh my God, I didn't know very well if what I was doing was okay, if I could have done it better. And then the second was easier. And I don't mean to say that it's easy, because it's a lot of work. But I think that having those people supporting me at the very beginning of my writing career has been instrumental in making me the writer I am now.
That's a good point. Yeah, sometimes we think design materials is quite a solitary pursuit, like Shakespeare just writing the next play. But it sounds like it's actually a lot of teamwork involved. You need a support network. If I'm a teacher right now who wants to get involved in publishing my materials, how would I find that person? Would it be someone I already know? Should I be reaching out to a certain place?
Well, I think that the other day I was giving a webinar on this, and I am a big Harry Potter fan, and Harry wears his invisibility cloak. Well, this is the opposite. You have to wear your visibility cloak.
Right.
So my advice, because it is what happened to me, my advice is get in touch with publishers, with the publishers' reps that go to your school. Talk with them about what you're doing with your own materials. Tell them about the ideas that you have. of course, don't disclose everything, right?
Yeah.
But so that they start thinking, oh, this person has very good ideas. Go to conferences and go to the publisher stands. Maybe the project manager is not there, but maybe a marketing person will be there. And if you start talking to them, they make yourself known. And also give talks in conferences that highlight your abilities, the things that you believe in, the things that
Yeah.
you can do. And publishers will pay attention to that. That worked for me. I mean, I was contacted by Macmillan just because the reps knew me. They knew what I was doing. And so when this project came up, they said, oh, maybe, do you remember Annie, this girl who teaches? And I didn't even live in Buenos Aires, where the big schools and the important schools are. No, I was living in the south of Argentina, teaching in a small academy. And it was like, do you remember her? Ah, yes, that girl who gave a talk about what this, and that in the last conference. That's how it happened. And I think that wearing your visibility cloak is essential.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, not being invisible, because most of us are already invisible, but actually becoming visible, wanting to stand out, and being proactive. If there's a teacher right now making great materials for their students, but no one else is aware of it and will become aware of it, then they're not going to move to a professional level.
If you want to make a career in as a published author, show your work.
Yeah.
I think it's just like that. I don't know, Rhett, how you feel about that.
Well, I've never talked, well, I have talked to a few publishers, but way before all that, like I just remember being in the classroom and having my little, like wanting to bring my style to the world, wanting my stories to be told, or wanting my ideas to be the ones put on paper. And I just, I got out my doodle pads, took out my pencils, and I just started making like doodles of what kind of lessons I wanted to teach. And then I learned how to, back in like the early 2000s, I was cutting out pictures from books and taping them in and photocopying them and finding new characters and stuff. And, and the people, the creatives these days are doing the same thing, but they're using like more digital tools. But basically what I was doing is just learning how to put my ideas on paper and putting that in front of the students and testing it with them. And then gradually over time, my skills got better and better. My awareness of the content that worked and didn't work was elevated. And pretty soon, after some time, I was getting, to a point where people were interested in the content that I was creating. And then, I think you could, from that point, you could throw some fuel on the fire and talk to publishers, talk to, different KOTESOL groups and give presentations about, the stories that you've learned about the process of doing it.
Yeah, I think that one of my moments when I started attracting attention was I was attending a conference in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.
Yeah.
And it was my first international my first conference as a presenter, and it was an international conference, and I was presenting what I had done with my students. I had a group of students, 16, 17-year-olds, and we were reading Animal Farm. And so instead of the typical thing that I hated as a student, and it was so boring as a teacher, that it's having the students retell the chapter, I started designing different activities to do. And I don't know, I had them making the plans for the windmill. And well, eventually we finished putting the pigs to trial, the pigs and Mr. Jones and some of the characters to trial. And I recorded that on VHS, imagine.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the medieval ages.
So it's a while ago.
Yes, a lifetime ago. And so I presented all that in the conference. And lots of people came up and said, wow, that's great. Such wonderful ideas. And I think that started the whole thing, because people started paying attention to what I was doing. Because at that time, I was really very young.
Yeah.
And nobody knew me.
I actually have this almost exact same story as that. It was, you know, the director at my school was observing classes, interviewing us, and said, and he looked at some of the work I was doing and he said, you should put together a presentation for the International KOTESOL conference, and you should do it on multi-level classes, because what you have here, other teachers really need to see it. And so I took his word. I wrote my abstract and I got my presentation in there and was selected. And then when I was presenting it, you know, there was somebody in the crowd from one of the publishers, and she's like, you have a lot of creative ideas for workbook activities. And afterwards, she actually emailed me and said, are you interested in working on a workbook for a certain publisher here in South Korea? But at the same time, I was just starting my school up. This was like 10 years ago. And I was like, no, I would love to work on a book idea, but I've always wanted to build my own school, and that's where all my energy is going, you know? So I've always been good at saying yes and no to things.
Well, that's very good, because I'm not very good at saying no.
Yeah, it sounds like getting your word out there, showing what you're working on is really important. Not just presenting at conferences, but presenting or showing the fact that you can design materials, you can design textbooks, and if the right person's in the audience, then perhaps they'll contact you. And especially now with online conferences, and especially with these presentations going on YouTube, being shared widely, it could easily lead to more opportunities coming your way. I think something sometimes I encounter is teachers perhaps wanting to make a step up, wanting to go to that different level, but they worry, like, do they have the skill for that? Is there a certain talent you need? Do you need to be a very creative person? Do you need, you know, very nice graphic design skills? Do you think publishing materials is something that you can learn? Is it something any teacher can do? Or is there a certain skill set, a certain talent for it that you think people possess?
Well, let's see. As for graphic design, I know nothing about graphic design.
Yeah.
You do, Rhett.
Me too. I'm not a graphic designer.
I thought you did.
I'm not a designer at all.
Right, because I don't have to. I mean, when you are given a project by a publisher, what they do is they ask you to describe what you want. For example, in terms of not the design of the page, because the decisions regarding design will be theirs.
Yeah.
You have to provide the text, the content, in my case. Maybe there are other publishers who request other things. In my case, so far in all these years, I've been requested to provide content and detailed descriptions or pictures, but my own pictures, of how I envisage a particular illustration, what I want as an illustration on the page. But they don't expect me to design anything. I provide a description or a rough sketch, and then their designers will take care. They will show it to me. For example, I remember with the course books that I have written, they would send me the designs, and we would say, okay, yes, I like this, I don't like that, I envisage this character as being like this, but I am not expected to design everything myself.
So you don't need all the skills necessary to publish a textbook?
At all. Not at all.
Nobody starts up as an expert. Everybody starts as a little child with a creative idea, and then through their life, it's the ones who keep building on those ideas and keep learning the skills required to tell that story or illustrate that story. And trust me, like some people can draw amazingly great artwork, and some people are good at working stories, and then some people are good at organizing. And the more roles you want to take on, the more work it's going to be. So I always believe in following that sort of whatever's you're called to. For me, it's not about, I'm not a drawer, I'm not an artist, I like doodling, but for me, I like linking stories together. And that I didn't really need any skills, like too many digital skills to do, other than use PowerPoint and find the right pictures to do the right job. But you know, like you can't just start off a new job set without having some of the skills. But everybody has a whole life of skills as a child or university student that they can bring forward. And how do they funnel that into their next direction that they want to go? And I think everybody has to ask those questions for themselves, like, how do I want to define my creative, vision for what I can bring to the world?
Yeah, and also there are, for example, maybe some teachers feel that they are not creative enough, but what do they mean by creative enough? Do they mean creative in terms of drawing the characters? Or perhaps they can come up with wonderful stories or with really good tasks for texts that another author writes. I mean, I've written course books, I've written workbooks, I've written teachers' books, worksheets, you name it. And depends on, sometimes I feel more comfortable doing some of the things, but not others. For example, I feel very comfortable writing teachers' books. Why? Because it's the teacher and the teacher trainer in me in the book. What I do is I put there ideas for teachers that I would use in my own classes. And for example, when I am writing course books, for example, with Catherine, what we did was split up the work. She's wonderful at creating stories. She creates fantastic stories. But I am better at doing factual things, researching interesting topics and building from those interesting topics. So we decided that we were going to split, for example, the work like that. She was going to take the fiction and I was going to take the facts. So you need to find your what you're good at.
Right. Know your strengths, not just try and do everything. Yeah.
Right. There are people who write wonderful workbooks, for example. And that is just as important as the course book. So you need to find your strengths.
So it sounds like a great lifestyle so far, this designing materials, something I mean most teachers love doing, especially for their own classes, at least at first. I'm sure there are some challenges, though, of designing materials, working with publishers. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges involved?
Rhett, do you want to?
I'll take this one first. Annie already hinted at the fact that you can't do what you want to do. You have to work within the realm of whatever they want created. And so I've always kind of felt like, nah, I don't want to write a book that follows your check boxes. I want to do it my way, how I want, why I want, and all those things. So I never really went through I've always said no to publishers. And I've always said yes to parents and students and the children, because well, I don't ask them, I watch them, I observe them, and I watch how they react to the curriculum and things like that. So I design for my students, and then they come to my school the next month. If I did a good job in the present month, then they'll enroll in the next month. And by working with the parents are paying for my service. I use that money that I earn from the service, and throw it into the textbook design. And then it's just sort of like the working together with all stakeholders to create that product that works for all of us. And I get to do it the way that I want, and they get to see enough of it to know that if they want to enroll or not enroll, and that's good enough for them. So that's why I didn't go the publisher route.
Right. If you're working for a publisher, you cannot do that. That's the point. Yeah. But you can defend what you stand for. I always tell people who want to start a career in writing, be ready to defend with sound methodological foundations why you are doing what you're doing. Because I mean, normally what they tell you, that is normally the publisher, the project manager has an idea and they give you a brief, but within limits, you can give your own opinion. I have always been able to give my opinion. For example, in this first book, this first course that I wrote back in the 2000s, I remember telling the manager and the project manager, listen, I don't want to write a book where the characters, the main characters are Billy, Meg, and Jack, who live in Brighton, because children in Argentine public schools, most children have never ever been outside their own hometown. So for them, in primary, talking about Brighton or Liverpool is totally out of their reality. So I would like the book to have real children from real Argentina and a story that is built around Argentina. And that's what we did. And it was a blockbuster. I mean, it was #1 sales the first year. I mean,
because you made it personal to their teaching context, not just random generic Brighton.
That's it. That actually the characters were my own students.
Oh, really?
Who at the time were the same age group that the book was aimed for. So I took even the names and they knew it. So when we did the presentation of the book in my hometown, they came to the presentation and their parents came to the presentation because they knew that those children who were called, I don't know, Pablo, Maria, Martin, etc., were them, that is, were these kids. So I had a strong motive for doing that, and the publisher accepted it. So I always tell them, within limits, you can put forward your ideas, you can defend your ideas, and the publisher will, if they are reasonable people, and I have always worked with reasonable publishers and reasonable editors, they will accept it.
So it's kind of like a relationship that's compromised with publishers. It's not, a door shuts and you're like, no, you can't do anything you want. No.
I haven't been in that situation because if I had noticed that it was going to be this, and this, and you cannot put in anything from yourself, I would say no to the project.
So you prioritize the autonomy over your work?
Absolutely. And so far, I've been very lucky to work with editors and project managers that have respected that.
Sounds good. So, Rhett, how about teaching in Korea, designing materials for Korean students? Do you take their cultural backgrounds into account in your process?
I do and I don't. First, I want to say a few things of what Annie just said about, about what was it? When you by working local, it gives you so many different advantages because you've got the seasons, you've got the holidays, you've got all the little things that, the students in their life, they see and they interact with. And that's like that's what defines my school more than a lot of other schools, because they're using published materials that have been made for a global industry. And when you're dealing with a global industry, you're dealing with a lot of, glossed over terms and glossed over, like everybody wants to teach these 10 themes. Everybody wants to teach it with these characters and with these activities. Whereas I'm like, well, yes, those are good, but they're not, I could do better if I do this, this, and this. And now after 20 years of teaching, well, and I started designing my own curriculum about 10 years ago, which I actually didn't have a lot of the education supporting the decisions that I wanted to like bring into my materials. So to get that sort of experience, to get that sort of know-how, I actually had to take a lot of courses, and I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I chose to, because you want to base your work in theory, and you have to learn about that theory. And if you're going to learn about that theory, you could do self-study. But when you do self-study, which is good, you need to be motivated, but you have nothing to prove to anybody. So people are like, well, where did you graduate with your master's? I'm like, I don't. And it's like, well, do you have your TESOL? I was like, no, I don't have my TESOL either. Then how can you say that you're creating materials from theory? And I'm like, well, I do self-research. It's like, well, and then they're like, blah, we're not listening to you. I'm like, okay. So then I went and took my TESOL 3 times over so I could have deeper and deeper and deeper conversations with these mentors. And only now that I've actually, stood on the shoulders of a lot of this research and a lot of these frameworks, can I actually stand up for my work a little bit. But bringing your own flavor to your school for the local, you have to be aware. You have to be aware of your students' needs and wants.
Yeah.
And this is my big, I dislike how, well, every book ever published was designed from the needs and wants of every student, but that's just on a general level. Like, that's like following a recipe. Great teachers, they take a recipe and they redesign it. They make it their own. They have their own way of adding 10 other great pieces to that, to make that like the best meal ever, with entrees, a main meal, a dessert. And that's what I do at my school. It's like, I take these general ideas, but then I add games, and then I add new layers to the games, and I understand the skills of the students. So how I teach the game evolves with how they acquire new language skills, acquire new task awareness skills. And that's how I can, and then when I have that content knowledge, then I can bring in the content at different stages when my students are ready. And now you can't do that with a book. You can do it with supplemental resources, but when you're so busy teaching, sometimes you don't have time to create a whole bunch of content. You're so busy managing the kids. So you really have to take time away from teaching and say, okay, during this time I'm teaching, and then outside of work, or I'm going to dedicate these 3 hours of the day to defining my course and then making it better with each iteration. So that's for me, how I've managed to make progress with the materials I develop for my students.
One thing I was wondering is, let's say I'm making materials now for my own classes, and I kind of have an intuitive understanding of when I've designed materials that I think are good for my students. If I'm doing it professionally, is there a criteria? Is there a way to measure the quality of my work? Like if I'm teaching a class, I might say, well, there's an objective, there's a review part, there's lots of students speaking time. How about when I'm designing materials? Is it just kind of an intuitive review of my work, or is there some kind of criteria, or you just wait for the publisher to give you feedback? How about you, Annie?
Well, I think that there are certain principles that you can follow, and you can, first of all, you can review your materials against those principles. And for example, I would have loved to have all the resources that there are available now when I started writing, or when I started writing my own materials, because right now there's a lot that is, I mean, I am not representing any publisher here or anything, but what I have found really useful, and I think that it's a good resource for aspiring published writers, is there is a series, let me remember, it's the how-to series. For example, how to write business English materials, how to write differentiated worksheets. There's a whole collection.
This is a series of books, like guides?
Yes, it's a series of books. It's the ELT Teacher to Writer series.
Right.
ELT Teacher to Writer. And they are covering, that is, I don't know, but I think that almost all the aspects of writing by now, because there are about 20 books that, and they are not big things that you need to spend a year.
It's not like a PhD.
No, they are small books written by published writers, and you can go to those books and find good tips and ideas to check your own work, to start write. For example, if you want to write video activities, okay, Kieran Donaghy, who's a specialist on designing activities for short videos, and is in film English. He has written one of these books, and it's fantastic. So it's very down-to-earth material, very down-to-earth tips that will help any teacher who wants to check whether what they are doing is okay or not. And also, of course, you can always look at publications, like, for example, Brian Tomlinson. I think that he's the Pope of materials writing. And I have always found his talks, his books really supportive. I mean, inspiring.
Right.
So I think that, yes, you can check what you're doing, and also using your material, trying your material, and that's what I used to do
in a real classroom with real students. Yeah,
a real classroom. We're asking fellow teachers to try the material with their classroom, and then listening to the comments of the children and of the teachers, because that's very important. Listening to the children too. I always ask them, okay, did you like this exercise? Why did you like it? Did you like this text? Did you like the story? Asking for feedback.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of teachers, they kind of judge it based on how it's working in the classroom, but actually explicitly asking students, did you enjoy this activity? How did it work? How could we improve it? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah. Sorry, Rhett. Yes, please.
I was just going to say that, asking them is one thing, but, observing them while they're actually doing, like, as a teacher, you step away and you can see things, like you're much older, you've got much more context and perspectives to look at, and like you can see when things are too hard or too difficult. You could see by their emotions whether they like it or not. Even if they don't even tell you, they might say they hate it 1 minute and love it the next, and if they finish it on a love, then they'll tell you they loved it. But even though they forgot that there's one aspect that they hated about it, and so it's really tricky. Like if you're so busy working with like managing students, then chances are you won't have the wherewithal of the whole class to actually make better materials, because you really have to be able to step back and say, all right, well, how are the kids really interacting with these?
Reacting to the material. Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it sounds like not just are they enjoying the activity there, Rhett, but also are they learning? Because if we just ask the students, maybe some things can be boring and they learn a lot. That could be something to consider.
I'm not sure if something is boring, I don't know if you can
I'm
learn
just
from
wondering
boring
if there's,
things.
let's say they're preparing to have a conversation, and I'm just saying, okay, write 3 questions you'll discuss with your classmate. Maybe that tiny little part's boring, but then it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, could be.
Or maybe not boring, just not
I have a good
particularly
example.
engaging.
I have a good example. Like sometimes if you give a task that's way too difficult, they will think it's too hard and therefore it's not stimulating enough. But if you can break that task into the smallest part, then they're like, okay, I kind of like this. I don't really like it, but I kind of like it. And then the better that they get at it, then the interactions that they have with their friends are like, well, I actually like this. And then as they get better with one thing, you add a new layer to it. And then suddenly they're doing, you know, a bunch of different like sequence of like small little subtasks that make up that whole big task. And they're like, oh, this was the best lesson ever. But as a teacher who's kind of trained to understand how to move through the content, you're like, yes, you know, I presented it, I staged it this way deliberately because I knew that you guys would have this problems, because the other 3 times I did it that way, I had problems. And thankfully I learned from my mistakes to learn how to stage a lesson better.
Yeah.
And another question, let's say there's a teacher now who's listening to this and is almost on the edge of moving into design materials. What would you say you love most about designing materials? What's really kept your passion going to keep doing this kind of work?
Well, I think it's the challenge of creating new things, not repeating myself, and coming up with fresh ideas and challenging myself to offering new things, to be it a workbook, a student's book, or a teacher's book.
Yeah.
I think that I see it as a challenge. That's something that keeps me, okay, let's see, this is a new project. What can I put here that I haven't done before?
So you don't like to kind of take a template you've got before and fill in the blanks? No. So it's always something new project.
That would be terrible.
That would be boring.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. I like repeating things again and again and again, because I get to come back, and when I come back to it, I can say, all right, these are the 3 things I'm going to improve on it this year. And then I space it out far enough, like for a whole year, so the students change, but I come back with slightly more experience with that, with the resources that I have.
But don't you change something as a result of revisiting the material?
That's where the newness comes in, because every time I teach it, I bring forward the new knowledge, and it expands my like ability to use that content. So, and I can anchor to it. So I'm not moving into the future on this endless treadmill, but I'm actually moving forward into the future with the assets that I want the most in my life.
So it sounds like you're innovating there. So you've got your kind of ideas and materials, but each time you're adding new creativity, new innovation. You're constantly improving your materials. So that's good.
Small, like for example, this next month I'll be teaching a story about Hannah, and she takes a family photo under the trees. Well, when I was teaching it last year, I realized that while walking under the trees, there were these worms, caterpillars hanging on the silk. And I'm like, oh, look at it, I gotta like walk by these things. And I stopped seeing things like that as an adult. But then as a child, you know, you see these little worms dangling, it's like, woo. So I went home and I added that to my course as soon as I got home, saying that because this new season, you know, like there's worms that will change into butterflies, I could put it into the course at this here moment. And it makes me really excited again to learn how things fit together.
Speaking of change, what are you working on right now? What kind of materials are you designing at the moment? How about Annie? Are you working on a textbook at the moment or some particular materials?
I'm working on a teacher's resource. Actually, it's a series. We are. I've been writing the teacher's resource books for Cambridge Global English since 2013. I did the whole first edition series.
Yeah.
And now I wrote 6 out of the 9 teachers resource books of the second edition.
Yeah.
And now we are on a new project, and I am also writing the teachers books for that. And I've also just finished writing a workbook for a German publisher. And right now, I'm writing differentiated worksheets.
Oh, so a lot. Is this something that you would spend most of your day doing rather than teaching in a classroom? This is kind of your main focus now.
Well, yes, because right now it's 100% of my time devoted to writing. I've stopped teaching. So I'm devoting all my time to writing and teacher training.
That sounds great. I think a lot of people will be inspired by that. If maybe they don't want to teach so many hours in the classroom, perhaps in the future they could move into the avenues.
Well, that's how it all started. I mean, when I started writing professionally, let's say, I was teaching full time. I was teaching at the university and I was teaching in the language school. And on top of that, I had a family with 3 kids and writing the book. So it was very crazy, but I was younger and I had more energy. And gradually, I started devoting more time to writing. When I moved to Spain, I started devoting more time to writing than teaching, mostly because I was teaching in company classes and adults. And I don't, although I love teaching, they are not as fun to teach as teenagers.
Younger learners. So I think educators, it's not just only in the classroom. I think educators, most of them like creating materials, getting things published. So that's definitely a route we can explore. How about Rhett? Is anything you're working on at the moment, materials wise?
Well, I'm at the younger stage where I've got 2 kids at home who are always running around outside. So I look at it as like, okay, what can I do with my own kids? Because they're at the age that I teach. Both of my sons are enrolled in my classes. So I have, like, what do I want to teach them? What do they want to learn? And how can I do it in a way that we both have a more enjoyable experience doing it? And it's wonderful because I can invest in work while learning how to be a better dad. But sometimes it doesn't always. Sometimes, the balance of time and energy don't hit everything equally. So right now I'm working on, with my older son, I'm working on how does Hansel and Gretel escape the witch's basement when they're locked in, having to work for the witch. And so they have to learn how to use locks. They have to learn how to play sequencing games where they have to use numbers in a proper sequence to unlock the locks. And that's the current little mystery challenge I'm working on.
Wonderful.
Right now with my students.
Well, thank you, Annie and Rhett, for your time today. I thought that was a really interesting discussion. I'm almost inspired myself now to jump into the world of material design, getting things published. That's very nice. If you want to learn more about Annie and Rhett's work, in the YouTube description for this video, you can click on the links and learn more. But for now, thank you very much. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time for another episode of KOTESOL Conversations. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.